tuning fork for a young Carl Wood. And I've always respected and admired the art of comedy, and I'm really pumped for today's guest, one of my favorite living comics, weaving just such a thread of truth and philosophy through the Afghan of his comedy. So I'm sure we're going to have a great time with this one. And bringing in the new year with me is my good friend and occasional co-host, Kyle Printeville. Kyle, my man, how the hell are you?
I'm so fucking pumped, man. I'm so excited. It's 2014. It's the year of the horse. Duncan Trussell is literally my favorite podcast
He's
to
your
listen
steed.
to. He's my steed. That is who leads my way. So thank you for bringing me on for this one. I'm so fucking pumped.
Absolutely, man. I mean, things are great. We're actually on the ballot of the Stitcher Awards. The money bomb's over $150 so far already. I'm really feeling great about everything. It seems like a lot has happened since we've been on the air. For one thing, the people of Colorado have been bold enough to deliver a beautiful fuck you to the federal government by legalizing weed for retail sale to anyone over 21. Fuck the cards, just as you would alcohol. It's definitely worth acknowledging. Weed is such a part of my daily life that I forget how serious it is, but it is. It's great. And they made over $1 million in taxes the first day, which is the big headline for supporters, as if to say, see, we were right. You can make a lot of money from selling weed. Yeah, we know that. The CIA knows that. Pfizer knows that. My girlfriend's brother knows that. Drugs make money. But you were telling me the other day about this Rolling Stone piece.
Yeah, Matt Taibbi. He's, one of my favorite authors, and I had originally read a book by him that you lent me, I'm pretty sure, where he was kind of drawing distinctions between 9/11 truthers and mega church people being similar but on other sides of the fence in terms of like craziness.
Yeah.
But he has really come around in his writings about banks and researching corruption in the banking industry. He now, in his articles for, Rolling Stone, he says things like the conspiracy theorists were right all along. And the particular instance he recently wrote about is this bank, HSBC, huge bank, international, global bank, one of the biggest. And they recently got busted. They're proven in court. All this came out that they were laundering money for Mexican and Colombian drug cartels, knowingly laundering the money, knowingly accepting the money. It got so ridiculous that the drug cartels were designing specific cases to put the maximum amount of money that they could give to the teller through the little window box. And it's just outrageous. And what ended up happening is that the Department of Justice decided not to pursue criminal charges against HSBC. And instead, they just fined them. It was a slap on the wrist. They took the money, and no one lost their job. No one got in trouble for this.
Yeah, apparently 1.9 billion, but one of the analysts in the article said that that's only about 5 weeks of income for the bank. It really isn't much.
Yeah, I mean, and when they find a bank like that, it looks to the people like, oh, wow, that's a big fine. They're really coming down hard on them. They're not coming down hard on them at all. What the HSBC was doing was taking money from the drug cartels and looking the other way. And then the Department of Justice, they have the opportunity to prosecute, but instead they take the money as well and look the other way.
Yeah. It's like, the drug cartels need a place to get their money, so they break off the bank. The bank gets in trouble, so they break off the Justice Department. It's just another smelly layer to peel off of the never-ending corruption onion,
Yeah.
Damn that corruption onion, Kyle.
You really can see with this example, I feel like, the connectedness. Like, oh, okay, this is the game. The drug cartels are one aspect of it. The banks for the laundering, that's another aspect. The Department of Justice, you buy them off, so they're not going to bust anybody. That's another aspect. The Department of Justice, as we've mentioned recently, with the Fast and the Furious scandal, they're knowingly selling firearms to Mexican drug cartels. So they're arming these guys. They're helping them move their money. They're not prosecuting anybody. And it's really exposing who are the kingpins in this drug game, who are the biggest fish, the ones who can't be touched. The street dealers, they're getting locked up all the fucking time. But the big billion-dollar launderers of money, no, not so much.
Of course. I mean, it's just a different set of rules, man. Everywhere you look. We aren't in the club, so the only way we're allowed to make money is by finding our place on the gear wheel. And then, all the self-empowering and creative ways to make money are filled with roadblocks. They got a great system in place to make sure your passion and enthusiasm for your great new food truck idea is bled dry and snuffed out by so many rules and so much red tape that you just say fuck it and get a job at Applebee's, where you can live out your culinary dream for a lot less headache in your corporate-sponsored prison of fear.
Sure. I mean, I know plenty of entrepreneurs I know run into injunctions and shit with the court and with the laws, and they're the government is very interested in the nuances of a small business. They're always trying to set up more obstacles and get more money out of the small business. Yeah. The big guys, not so much. They never, and their justification is, oh, we can't prosecute HSBC because then there would be a crisis of confidence in the banks. Well, there ought to be a crisis of confidence in the fucking banks. Nobody trusts them. They're fraudsters.
It seems so transparent, but it's just you got to deal with it every day, and then you get to come home to a chorus line of news networks that inform you of the widespread new knockout game, so that even though you're broke and scared and disrespected and depressed, you should look at today as a net win because you didn't get knocked the fuck out by some out-of-control black kids, right? I mean, you've seen the stories of the knockout game. How stupid is this?
It's an example of how the media, the corporate media, they're all on board the same thing. Just like the banks, they pretend like they're competing. They're not competing. They are all just in different slices of the overall pie. They're all getting a cut of it. And they meme this idea. They keep projecting knockout game, knockout game, knockout game. It becomes a term. Now we're talking about it. They brought it into real life existence. But obviously, this is not happening. What is the incentive to go around knocking people out? This doesn't actually happen. It's just part of the news's overall strategy to keep everybody afraid, of each other. Because if we're afraid of each other, then we're not uniting and connecting and becoming powerful and realizing that our real enemies are not black teenagers, but they are in fact HSBC and the Department of Justice and these people who claim to be representing us. We can realize we're all in this together if we weren't so afraid that we're going to get knocked out in public.
It is stupid. I mean, you put up a few smoke and mirrors and then people they lose interest in finding out who's really fucking them. I mean, 10,000 people a year are killed by lightning. What kind of numbers are the knockout game putting up? It's stupid. If you weren't told, you wouldn't even fucking know.
It's just, they guide your attention. They tell you what they want you to be thinking about, which is fear, always to be afraid, always be worried. And they portray that, if you're a consumer and you're out buying stuff, everything's great. Hey, there's no depression. There's no economic hardship going on. Never talk about that on the news. Not really worried about that, but they project that it's just a much more violent world than it actually is. Like the real violence isn't talked about, but they project that there's all this stranger on stranger violence going on.
Yeah. It's a tough thing to do, but you got to see through the bullshit, people. You got to find your own creative happiness, and Duncan Trussell is the man to help us do that. He's going to be with us on the other side of all my bullshit.
We're here because we don't buy into the bullshit of mainstream culture. We're tired of the mundane, passionless careers we've been shuffled into as a result of this orchestrated debt-based system of rule, and the stranglehold on education and entertainment by cold, soulless corporations. People, yes, we are frustrated. Yes, we are tired. And we reject the pre-approved tranquilizers that are Monday Night Football and an ice-cold Budweiser. But we have to stop hiding. Stop hiding behind the headphones and the Cherry Popper 420 username. Let the world see that the resistance is strong and society is changing. There was a time to be anonymous, but that time has passed. And so the Higherside Chats would like to present Conspiracies as the dawning of this new paradigm in the uniform of the revolution. Because bold fashion should mean more than some celebrity meat dresser frat boy in a silly pink polo. Conspiracies redefines bold fashion as having the balls to reject socially uncomfortable and unpopular truths from your radiant chest. All fucking day. Conspiracies.net. Let them know that you know. Bold designs for troubled times. Hard truths. Soft talk.
Folks, I gotta tell you about a little thing that we call the THC Money Bomb. That's when I take half the donations I get every 5 episodes and gift that back to one of the listeners. So if you can, consider donating $5 or $10 to THC at thehighersidechats.com/donate. Knowing that you're helping out a show you love and with the other half helping out a random like-minded person. And hey, it could even be you. Our first THC Money Bomb got just over $500 and it was a big help to me and paid for a networking certification exam for one of our listeners. That's awesome. And I'm hoping we can have success stories like that almost once a month. Look, I love analyzing the multitude of ways we're getting fucked by the global elite, but we have to do more than just talk. And that's why with this little weekly show that comes out for free with no paywalls to the second hour, no subscription fees for the archives, and no long rambling ads, besides this one, hosted by a broke guy with a soul-crushing 9-to-5 job, has worked out a way to make a helpful financial impact in the lives of the listeners before it's even had 100 episodes. What does conspiracy mogul Alex Jones do for people? What does joining the local Zeitgeist movement chapter do for anybody? Yeah, this isn't going to change the world, but in a society where most of your money is fueling wars you don't believe in and feeding corporations that are actively undermining you and your health, you can make sure a couple of bucks a month feeds a machine that's on your side. And we might create the newest and most effective model for all podcasting monetization in the process. So ask the other shows you listen to why they don't have their own. And to keep this kosher, if you can't afford to donate even $5, then send your name and contact info to me, Greg Carlwood, at P.O. Box 635223, San Diego, California 92163, and we'll put you in the pool anyway. No donation necessary, but the more we get, the bigger impact we can have, and that's what we call the THC Money Bomb. Boom. Well, Higherside chatters, a lot of us see the world as an uphill battle against long-standing pyramids of power that use their various institutions, rules, and regulations to funnel most of the people into positions of soulless, robotic 9-to-5 economic slavery, where our frustration and isolation are left to boil inside, knowing that we've been left with little choice than to abandon our dreams and ideals for the ultimate swindle, working as gears in the very corporate machines that keep us down. It's no way to live, people, and a lot of times waking up to these ideas can lead to serious depression over just how stuck one might feel. Well, today we're talking to a man who's been able to wade those dark waters and emerge as someone who's had the strength to follow his artistic path and hopefully can sprinkle us with little inspiration and education in these areas. The Crowley of comedy, conjuring hearty gut laughs from the infinite dark abyss, and the host of a digital soapbox of his own, one of my favorite podcasts, the Duncan Trussell Family Hour, the pimp of pimps himself, Duncan Trussell. How the hell are you?
Hi.
Hey, man.
That's a heavy introduction, Greg.
Yeah, I do that. I don't know, but
is that what you say every time?
No, it varies, but I try to set the stage.
Wow.
But
yeah, man, go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's cool. I mean, I'm just honored to have you here. You know,
Thank you.
I'm sure half the audience is foaming at the mouth with an aching erection for this episode, and
wow,
another half is probably feeling a bit like I feel when I find out the Daily Show guest is going to be Jennifer Aniston or something like that.
Well, I hope not.
Well, you know, I often credit the inspirational rants of Bill Hicks and George Carlin as like a real tuning fork for my young, rebellious, and confused self. I mean, comedy was a dream of mine for a long time and then morphed into this, but as much as I love it, it can also be agonizing torture, especially in the early days, and that's sort of what I was hoping we could start with you, man, because I get a lot of messages from people that are on that artistic or entrepreneurial path, and it's full of am I good enoughs and am I wasting my times? And it takes a lot of inner strength to work that out, especially in the brutal comedy world. So, I mean, let's talk about those early days, man. I mean, did you have a lot of those self-defeating thoughts?
Yes. Yeah, yes. I mean, comedy is an art form that's based on rejection, because that's how you develop as a comedian.
Right.
So you are consistently being rejected by audiences of varying sizes, and you're being rejected by whatever auditions that you're going on, and you're being rejected by people who maybe don't want you to be on their shows, and so you really do sort of develop through the rejection. You know, that's the thing. A lot of times people, if you hear like a very beautiful person complain about their life, when I would hear that, I'd kind of roll my eyes and think, oh, right, look at that beautiful person. what do they have to complain about? They're
Yes.
symmetrical and beautiful, and they have nothing to complain about. But now I realize that really the curse of a beautiful person is that they don't get to experience rejection as much as most people do. And by not experiencing rejection, it causes bits of their ego to sort of become enlarged in maybe in ways that aren't going to help them navigate the normal waters of life. You know, like how deaf people talk. The reason they talk like that because they can't hear their voice, so their
Right.
voice becomes different than the way people who can hear their voice talk. In the same way, a very beautiful person, if they're always surrounded by people who are only being drawn to them because of the surface level, and if they're around guys who maybe just want to like hook up with them and are attracted to the just the external surface, and they start believing that that's the most important thing, then it can warp their ego in a similar way to the way the voice of a deaf person can become. So stand-up comedy, what you want is to get that instant feedback from the universe, and the more you allow that to help you grow, instead of fighting against it or resisting it or thinking, oh, these audiences are so bad. It's a bad audience. One of the first things you learn in comedy is there are no bad audiences. It's just your ability to tune into the frequency, or tune them into your frequency, rather. And so yes, that's a long answer, but yes, much struggle, much rejection, for which I'm now very grateful for.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with you. It's like the struggle builds character. Something I've always liked is the idea of a Venus Project society, a resource-based economy. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but basically a society where the goal instead of individual wealth is collective wealth and making sure the lowest common denominator has a life that's worth living. And I think about that, and it sounds real utopian and idealistic, but the one question I have about that kind of world is, where is the struggle that builds character? Some of the people I know in my life that I like the most have had really rough times, and those rough times, like you say, it does build character. It gives you some inner strength that is kind of lost on people who've always had it easy.
Well, see, so what you're saying there is that if there is abundance, then struggle will end. In other words, if there is some kind of external abundance, then the internal struggle goes away.
Yeah, kind of. Like in this type of society that people talk about as being near perfect, I wonder if that perfection could also really affect it in a negative way, that everyone's just a little too privileged.
Well, right. So again, let's say what you're saying is a perfect society. And when you say a perfect society, it sounds like you're talking about external adjustments to the way things currently are. So the idea is like, just imagine that instead of this being whatever this reality happens to be, that it's a computer simulator, and that we could shift every single external aspect of the universe to make it so that every person on Earth has the clothes they need, the food they need, shelter, all their basic needs are met, even more than their basic needs. So there's only time to everything comes down to some form of self-expression, because there's no longer the necessity to labor in the way people do. So let's imagine that we can adjust things like that. Some people think that if these adjustments were made, then now we would have a perfect society, or that people would experience happiness because these external adjustments have happened. And if if I were Satan and I really wanted to create a hell dimension, what I would tell the people, and I could implant one idea into their heads, then the first idea I'd want to implant into their heads is, if you change the external world, you will feel better internally. And
great point.
Because what that would then result in is a constant hunger and a constant need to buy things or shift things, or if I could change this, if only I could change this person in my life, then suddenly I would be so much better. Oh, if only I could make my girlfriend understand this thing or that thing, or my mom or my dad or my boss. And so what ends up happening then is you have relinquished all of your power to the external world. You've just given it all away, and now you're a victim. So I think that the idea is, if we focus on working on ourselves, on the internal world, and we really focus on like going deep into ourselves and understanding where our blocks are that are keeping us from really experiencing love, then the natural result of that is that our external world begins to change naturally. It begins to change in the same way that if there's a projector that has dust on it, if you get the dust out of the projector, then that giant dark shadow on the screen will go away.
Yeah. See, I like, that's what I like about you, man, is this, you're into this spirituality wheelhouse. I mean, I've been a big fan of Alan Watts for a long time. That's pretty much where I've gotten all of my knowledge or thoughts on spirituality. And it all sounds good when I have the earbuds in, but I have a hard time. It doesn't really resonate into my life all that much. And that's kind of the point that I'm at. I know Kyle's here with me, and he is my spiritual friend. I mean, he's my Zen friend. You know, he takes a lot of this stuff more to heart than I do. And I want to, but I just feel that I'm kind of spiritually retarded. And maybe Alan Watts would say that I'm putting that limitation on myself when I say that, and I'm making rules for myself. But how has it really resonated for you? How have you been able to feel these things that you've obviously studied a lot? How have you been able to incorporate them into your life to actually make some change?
Well, the whole thing starts off for most people as a tail feather that you want to throw up, you know, so like it differentiates you, you know, mostly it's when young people, it's really important to them to differentiate themselves or to create a kind of, you know, this is what I'm all about. So,
yes.
So people will wear clothes that indicate that they're a member of whatever, you know, demographic the clothing choice represents. So it's a way to associate yourself with people you respect, and it's a way to differentiate yourself from people that maybe you don't want to be like. Usually that's your parents, as a form of rebellion. So spirituality for me started off as just a way to get girls, really. It just started off as like, oh, you know, like, I mean, I don't know, it wasn't a conscious decision, like, oh, I'm gonna start talking about meditation so that girls will think I'm spiritual. It was a deeper thing than that. But in the Bhagavad Gita, it's one verse I really like. Krishna is talking about the various people who come to him. And it's not like the holy people of the world come to me. It was something like seekers after wealth. There's a lot of like, you know, like the people who come to me initially are coming to me for their own personal desire, for their own personal gain, or to get high off of it or whatever. You know, that's a better way to put it. It's another reason people get into it, is because they want to get high. They like getting high, and they can sense that in the practice of meditation, there's an intoxication that can happen, or in the expansion of the self, there's a kind of a depth that can be reached.
Of course, yeah.
So it starts off like that. And so a lot, you know, that's a funny thing with service or helping other people. A lot of people will say, you know, you only want to help people because it makes you look good. You only want to help people because you're getting off on that and it makes you feel good. It's like, yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. That's why we all start these things, is because it feels good. But the funny thing about spirituality, I think it can be compared to something I read about the networks that distribute and sell LSD tend to dissolve, because the people who are in the process of selling LSD are also taking LSD. And the more that you take LSD, the more your personality goes from being an individual to a sort of non-differentiated oneness. Or when you're on enough LSD, you spend times in a state of psychoactively induced non-dualism. And so in the same way with spirituality, with meditation, exploring your internal universe, what begins to happen is that your initial reasons for getting into it fall away. And so so what I'm saying, you say this doesn't resonate with you, or in the real world it doesn't resonate with you. I think it doesn't resonate with me a lot of the time either, but it's something I can always return to and go back to. And that's why it's called a practice.
Good point.
It's not like you decide, oh, I'm going to be spiritual today, and then you walk around shooting phony smiles at people while inside you're just a cauldron of rage.
Right,
it's not.
right.
That's not what it is at all. It's and that's why I think a lot of people you run into who say they're spiritual right away are like, shut the fuck up. Look at you. You're
Right.
seething. You're seething. You're so angry. You're so angry. And it's like, that's right. They are angry. But the difference maybe between them and a regular angry person is that they are making steps, at least in the direction of working on themselves and dissolving that internal anger. And if that means shooting phony smiles at people, I don't think that's the worst thing ever. But so it's a process. And it's a process that doesn't happen maybe even in one incarnation. And so what that means is we have to be very, very patient with ourselves with this stuff.
I
That makes
definitely
sense,
resonate when you say that it's a practice, because for me personally, yeah, I listened to Alan Watts' lectures, but it just wasn't enough. I mean, he's funny, it's great, but when you actually start putting it into practice, then when you hear poets like Rumi, when you hear certain people say things, you're like, oh, it fucking hits you like a ton of bricks because you felt that. It's not appealing to your thinking mind. You have fucking felt that. And like some of these spiritual concepts, like what's called faith or trust, like trust that things are going to be not necessarily good, but just they're going to be what they're going to be, and you're learning from it no matter what. That kind of trust, you have to physically be invested in that. It's not like a get out of jail free card, like kind of thinking about heaven is, where you're like, oh, well, I believe in God, so I'm on the right team, and eventually I'm going to get my pass to that pearly gates. But trust is like, fuck, man, I'm at my lowest. Oh no, it gets even lower from here, but I still have to keep invested, keep the things in motion. I'm like Sisyphus. I just got to keep pushing, because although it seems like I'm at my rock bottom, I have to physically trust that this is going somewhere other than the sometimes extreme pain that I feel in the present moment.
Well, one thing that you said that I really liked is getting out of your thoughts, and because the thoughts are the what you were just talking about. That's very much what my mind will tell me too. Your thoughts will try to come up with all these like, well, it's going to get better, or it's going to get worse, or I am like Sisyphus. This is something that Jack Kornfield talks about. The mind, in the same way that the mouth salivates, saliva, the mind salivates thoughts. So it's the mind is always creating thoughts and thoughts and thoughts. And so we get caught up in those thoughts, and our attention becomes focused on those thoughts. And so the simple idea is to move from those thoughts into the heart, or into the place where we just feel. And that's kind of that's the practice, is developing mindfulness, so that now we're watching the salivation of the mind in the form of all these various thoughts. And you sit and you watch, and you don't have to sit down to meditate to do this. You can do this now. You can watch the thoughts that might be in your mind right now, or the way you feel right now, and you just sort of watch this. You watch and watch. And the more that you watch, the more you begin to see the funny way that there is the thoughts that seem so important within a few minutes will dissolve without resolution. These thoughts that always come up, they're always seeking some, like, it's like a one side of an equation that's always seeking the other side of the equation. But you'll notice the other side of the equation never really comes. Maybe you'll come up with some answer here and there, but quite often there'll be some question. There'll be some like unresolved thing, and you just watch that feeling of something not being resolved, and then it dissolves and goes away. And so then it's like over the course of that, you sort of begin to realize that this whole time that you've been caught up in your thoughts, you've been ignoring the way your body feels. And then suddenly you look and you're like, fuck, my back hurts, my shoulder hurts, my foot hurts, whatever. There's all these pains in your body that you've just been ignoring while you've been caught up in this crazy, endless auction that's happening in your mind with this super fast chatter of your brain, and so then you're like, shit, look at these little pains. And then the more you watch the pains of your body, maybe then you'll start realizing, like, I'm fucking lonely, man. You know what I mean? I'm lonely. I feel lonely, or I feel sad, or I feel angry, or I feel tired, or I feel scared. Then that's when you really start watching. Then you realize, like, underneath the loneliness, it's fear, man. Fucking terror. And then you're like, holy shit, inside of me is just a ball of primordial terror, because at my deepest self, I know that everything I have, including my body, will be annihilated by the force of time. And if that's not terrifying, I don't know what the fuck is. But we are so horrified by this idea that we try to escape from it by diving into our thoughts, into the external world. And the process is, instead of running away from this thing that initially seems like a multi-headed hydra, the goddess Kali, with a necklace with the heads of the gods that she's wearing, the decapitated gods, this primordial destructive force inside of it, instead of running from it, you turn and face it. And that's, the more you turn and face it and sink into the fear, the more the fear begins to go away. And underneath that, holy fucking shit, man. Underneath that, that's where paradise is. That's the Garden of Eden. That's where suddenly you realize that you're in heaven, only it was too intense. It was too much love. It was too much beauty for you to accept it, so you escaped all the way out into your ego, which is where most people live. And I imagine that enlightenment would be a situation where suddenly that ego mechanism that was essentially just the sand you were trying to poke your head in completely dissolves, and all you experience perhaps is just this endless sort of sense of harmonious love, or loving kindness is what they call it.
Man, it sounds beautiful, man. Really eloquent. Let's talk about that fear a little bit. I think that's probably where a lot of people are stuck. I mean, recently I heard you talking about these types of things and the artist path, and you said there's a lot of closets to come out of, like the artist closet. And I thought that was a really unifying way to put it, because I do think most people have something they want to be, but are just afraid, whether it's a homosexual or a chef or a rock star. And it takes a lot of courage to be the you that you really want to be. It's fucking tough, man. I mean, how have you coped with the artist path? I mean, you've been doing this a long time. I'm sure it seems easier now, but when you first started out, I'm sure there was tons of self-doubt.
Well, what you begin to learn is that the more you get out, the more you get out of your own way and trust, the more whatever's supposed to happen happens. Mm-hmm. So it's a really funny thing when you begin to realize that you're the one who's you're the obstruction, you're the only obstruction, and when you begin to realize that, it's a hilarious thing. It's like you've solved some hacky murder mystery where the detective is the murderer, and the whole time he's been trying to trace who's done all these killings or who's causing all these problems, and finally realizes that somehow it's himself. So it's when you begin to realize that your greatest moments are the ones where you're not the little you is not even there anymore, and you begin to realize that if you just let go and allow this incredible explosion of happeningness that is constantly recreating itself in every moment come through you, you really are just that thing, and you stop resisting that, then whatever it is that needs to come into the world as you and through you will come into the world.
Yeah.
And so it's that process of just letting go. That's what I learned. When I you begin to notice that your best sets when you're doing stand-up comedy, you're not there. You get off stage and you weren't there. You're like,
Right.
who the fuck was up there? and then when you're writing, and the best stuff is coming out of you, you're like, an hour passes and you look back at what you wrote and you think, man, that person's a good writer, but that's not fucking me. And then when you're on your best rants or you're having your best podcasts, you might not even remember what you said.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I've learned. It's a process of surrender, and it's where surrender meets revision.
Yeah. That you are the only obstacle. That really strikes a chord with me. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I haven't said this before, but most of my shows for the longest time have started with the line, drinking a little drink, smoking a little smoke. And that really came from a place in the early days where I wasn't confident talking to someone like Rupert Sheldrake or Jacques Fresco. And it was like a backdoor to saying, hey, I'm a little drunk, I'm a little high, so if this interview sucks, well, I wasn't 100%. And I mean, now I'm over that now, but I think that's a big thing. People self-sabotage. If you say to yourself, I'm only trying with 70% of my effort and I fail, well, that's not so bad because I didn't give it 100%. So it's not a complete and utter failure. I mean, that is so that you are the only obstacle thing is so true.
It's a really fascinating thing when you start realizing that. And it's like, okay, well, if you're a conspiracy theorist, then you begin to realize that you are the fucking conspiracy. that you've been projecting out into the world all of these, terrible things that are actually not out there at all. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't a military industrial complex, a prison industrial complex. I'm not saying that people profit off of medicine and that bankers have figured out how to use television to hypnotize and manipulate people into believing that they need to take out terrible loans to get homes and cars. I'm not saying that that's not real. That's
of course
that's very, very, very real.
Yeah.
But what's the deeper problem? What's the deeper conspiracy? What's the deeper problem? What would make it so all those fucking hypnotic rectangles no longer had any effect on the brains of the people absorbing that information? What would do that? What would make it so that all of the hypnosis became completely irrelevant? What would that be? That's an important question, because if you could answer that question, then in it you would have the seeds of a true revolution that wasn't based on force. It wasn't based on military intervention. It wasn't based on toppling dictators or overthrowing power structures, which we've seen since the beginning of time only leads to the rebirth of those identical power structures. What would be something that would be a true transformation to society? What would be the seed of that? It would have to be some kind of internal realization. And that internal realization, I think, would be understanding that you are not a oneness or a individualness, but you're a part of a whole. You're part of a whole thing. Right. And it would be a kind of letting go, I think. Something like that, because it's a really funny thing, man, when you start working on yourself and you start working on that, on embracing and loving that dragon that has been rampaging through your life disguised as you, then that thing starts changing. And when that thing starts changing, all of a sudden your behavior changes in really fascinating ways. You'll get cleaner. Your house will start getting cleaner, maybe. You'll start eating a little better. It's weird. You start slowing down. You start slowing down for real, not because you think you should slow down, but because you're actually enjoying the moment. And then that's a weird fucking thing too, because all of a sudden, if you're somebody like, for many years, I defined myself by my anger. I was angry all the goddamn time, man. I was fucking pissed at my mom for not believing in me enough, or I was pissed at my dad for being an alcoholic when I was a child, or I was pissed at my girlfriend for not loving me the way that I wanted to be. Anger, 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 anger. When that starts going away, it really you begin to understand the idea of Buddhism, that the cause of our suffering is attachment. And you realize that it's not, they weren't necessarily talking about our attachment to matter. They were talking about our addiction to anger, our addiction to the negative feeling states that give us a sense of form. You begin to realize that you've been addicted to this. And when it goes away, there's a weird kind of withdrawal, and you start fighting against happiness, which is a really funny thing to find yourself doing. Like, I've been walking along, just walking my dog, no girlfriend. I used to always have to have a girlfriend. No girlfriend, just alone in the world. Walking my dog by the river, by the LA River, and all of a sudden I feel happier than I've ever felt in my life. And the first reaction that comes into my mind is, am I going crazy? I can't be happy right now with just this. No, I have to have something happening. I have to have some goal I've reached, some external thing. And when all of a sudden the happiness just starts coming minus the external thing, you get it's weird, man. It doesn't seem right. And that's one of the exciting byproducts of beginning to beginning to work on yourself. Sorry for the long ramble, my friend.
No, that's what you're here for. That's kind of where I get stuck, because I always get caught up in when people say, hey, be happy, look at the positive things in your life, because it could always be worse. I get caught up in feeling like it could always be better too. Like that to me isn't an excuse. I'm sure there were slaves in the cotton fields that were being like, well, at least we're not carrying around bowling balls. At least this cotton's nice and soft and light and easy to carry. And it's like, just because it could be worse doesn't mean we shouldn't try to make it better.
Yeah, I know what you mean. This is the idea that a spiritual practice implies a type of passivity.
Yeah,
so,
a numbness.
Yes, right. Or like Karl Marx, religion is the opiate of the masses. And so it's a way that so spirituality is a kind of like numbing escape mechanism that we use to rationalize being trapped and not getting out of the trap. So, and I understand that, and I understand why people would think that. But let's imagine that you and I had fallen into a pit trap, and we're stuck. We're like stuck in this trap.
Okay.
Now, if you're like, in a state where your mind is disturbed, where you're angry or freaked out or scared, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm calm, who's going to have a better chance of figuring out how to get the fuck out of that trap?
Right. Good point.
So the idea is that this isn't something that you do to try to avoid improving your external circumstances. This is something that you do so that when your external circumstances improve, you can enjoy those improvements. And that's something that, so many people, they work and work and work and work because they want things they think if they change the world, if they get this or that, or whatever the thing is, they're going to feel better. And so they're in this constant state of anxiety because they're always in an in-between place.
Yes.
So their life is always in between. It's basically like a sandwich. And each piece of bread is whatever moment where they've gotten something that they think is going to take away the anxiety, right? But the sandwich that they're eating all the time is a sandwich made of anxiety and fear, in the sense that I've got to get to the next fucking goal, the next stop, the next thing. It's a form of addiction. It's like you get whatever it is that you're striving for in this incarnation. A promotion at your job, a lover. You get on TV if you're a comedian. You get whatever the thing is that they've been telling you is so important. You finally get that fucking thing, and that high is a very fleeting high. The next time you get something you've been working to try to get for a very long time, go into a mindful state and watch the biochemical high that's happening as your brain releases dopamine, and you suddenly feel that rush of confidence, and this is what it's all about. Oh yes, I'm really here. And now watch as that gradually diminishes, and then you find yourself back in the same goddamn anxiety state that you were in before you got the thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's when you realize, oh fuck, I'm a crack addict, only I'm not addicted to crack. I'm addicted to the dopamine that's released in my brain anytime external circumstances line up in a specific way that gives me the feeling of accomplishment. And that's I don't know if that's any way to live, because those moments, if that's when you're alive, then that means that you're going to be alive during your entire life, maybe if you're lucky for a week. I would much rather, if it were possible, I'd much rather experience that sense of peace and connection and happiness in the middle of the sandwich.
Mm-hmm.
And so that when those moments of accomplishment come, I didn't have that gnawing sense of like, this isn't really going to last. I'm just going to go back to where I was. You will, you're going to enjoy getting stoned so much more if you can find a place where you can be harmonious and at peace, regardless of how your external circumstances line up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like in the West, we have a really hard time with spirituality or even knowing like what the purpose is. I feel like we have no way to identify somebody who's taken a holy path. We don't even understand what that is. And Joseph Campbell talks about how in the West, the mind is so consumed with being right. It's right or wrong. It's the in group or you're exiled.
Yeah.
So you're always trying to be on God's good graces. You're always trying to do whatever necessary to please the authority. And the consequence of this is that we don't have a spirituality in the West like they do in the East, where the whole point is to get into accord with nature. So in the West, what we have is we're trying to override nature. We're trying to manage and control and be in charge of our natural impulses. We're trying to self-censor ourselves. We're trying to put the best face forward. All of this is in an attempt to put on a show that says, oh yeah, I'm doing things right. And it's all about being right. And we're so consumed with being right that we fucking hurt our girlfriends and our loved ones, and we're just always trying to prove we're right. We're like obsessed with this thing. We're stuck in the head, and it's nothing to do with getting in harmony with what's natural. And I think that is, when you put spirituality into practice and you really delve into it, it's about relaxing into the present moment and not feeling this like, I don't know, just pent up like anxiousness where you're just trying to like resist the present moment. You're constantly just trying to be in the past or the future. You got to get into what's natural, and sometimes what's natural is maybe what you previously thought was naughty or off limits or something you shouldn't be doing.
That's a beautiful way to put it. Yeah, and I think what you're describing there is a form of compassion for the self, so that instead of, it's an embrace of this self versus this sort of Western idea of like, I'm gonna be a better person. I'm gonna be better today. Yes, I'm a better person now. It's not that. It's like that's what we dealt with when you're a little kid. You deal with that with your parents. They always want you to be different, and so you internalize that constant tension from your parents pushing you in this direction or that direction, and then you begin to think that the way to express love to yourself is by always thinking that you should be different. And that's just something that you've sort of absorbed from the world. So the one huge act, one giant revolutionary act that you can do is you can just start loving yourself the way that you are right now. I mean, that's a wild idea for a lot of people because they look at themselves in the mirror and they think, look, I have love handles, or they think I drink too much, or they think, I'm whatever it is. There's always something that you need to change about yourself in the most drastic way as soon as possible, all the time.
Right.
And so if you stop that, if you just give yourself a break, man, a real break, because it's like, let's really consider our situation here. We got shot out of a pussy into time, and we're going to die. Think about that. We're going to die. We are dying right now. And everything that you have is going to go away. And everyone that you know is going to turn into dust. This is not the easiest class to be taking. And it's important to acknowledge that, not just for ourselves, but for the people around us. So if you've been eating too many hamburgers, or if you've been smoking too many cigarettes, or if you've been drinking too much booze, or if you've been too angry with your neighbors or your girlfriend, or you've been that, the first step is to recognize, oh yeah, that is there. But instead of then being not just addicted to something, that being followed by being guilt-ridden because of this thing that you're doing, just think, man, you know what? I understand it. I get it. I see why you're reacting to the world in this way. I understand. You're just trying to find a little warmth. You're just trying to find some way to experience, to experience happiness. So that's the first step, man. You embrace yourself. You love yourself. And this is why psychedelics can be so very useful.
Yeah.
Because they will show you yourself in a way that maybe you're not quite ready to see. And that's what people call the bad trips, That's where when you get stoned and paranoid. I remember like one of my first bad marijuana trips, I was smoking weed in North Carolina. I was in high school. And I was sitting in the back of my friend's shitty car. And I closed my eyes and I saw myself like standing at the edge of this obsidian cliff in the middle of some blasted wasteland, completely naked. I was looking at myself, at my fat body and my weird overbite, my weird teeth and my weaselly nose. And I was looking at it and it was sort of rotating around and just seeing myself, right? And so all I did at that moment was think, oh God, I hate it. I hate myself. I hate my being. I don't like this me. I don't want this me. I want to be in shape, healthy. I want a symmetrical face. I resisted it, and that created a terrible trip. I went home, fell asleep, woke up a little depressed. So psychedelics will show you this thing that you perceive as yourself. And if you can, when you see the thing, just make the smallest attempt, instead of running away from hating it, to love it, embrace it, forgive it, accept it. This is the universe, and it's as perfect as anything else in the universe. And if you could just make those attempts at doing that, wow, man. All of a sudden, you'll find yourself being a little more loving to the people around you, because you'll realize that the thing that was annoying you or irritating you or angering you in the people that you come in contact with throughout the day was not some implicit aspect of that person's self, but the projection of who you are and the parts of yourself you can't accept onto the screen of the world.
I love it, man. Let me ask you about that aspect of getting high in spiritual practice as opposed to psychedelics, because I've had several guests, spiritual guru type of guys who have dismissed psychedelics when I've brought them up, and they say it's an artificial way to reach those deeper levels of reality, those deeper aspects of the self. And they say I get a lot more benefit out of getting there naturally with meditation and spiritual practice. And I'm excited to hear what you would say about this, because I think you're one guy who's experienced both sides of that. How do they compare to you? Is it a different thing altogether?
Well, whenever I hear a spiritual teacher advise sobriety in a kind of like adamant way, like you have to be this way.
Yes.
If you want to gain realization, I'm always suspicious of that, because it reminds me of like, anytime I hear, there's no other way to the Lord but through the acceptance of Jesus Christ. It seems to be a version of that, and it's advising, it's saying you have to be pure in this way if you want to achieve realization. Now, the group of people that I hang around with is the Ram Dass group of people. And, Ram Dass, of course, was Richard Alpert, who was hanging out with Timothy Leary and taking taking psychedelics. and really taking psychedelics, man. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
these days, we take psychedelics, and I think some people might take a heroic dose here and there, but they were literally drinking LSD, like drinking it. Like, God damn it, who knows how much they were taking? And they were, like trying to dissolve their ego boundaries and doing a lot of social experiments over the course of like exploring consciousness through psychedelics. And they all came to different conclusions. But Alpert realized that he didn't want to come down anymore. And so his problem was not that was not the state that the psychedelic was creating, which was a kind of unified unit of consciousness. His problem was every time I reached this state of merging, I come back down, and I'm a me again. No matter what, I'm inevitably a me again. So his question was, what is this state that I get to when I take psychedelics? What is it? Because we don't seem to have maps for it in the West. That's how he put it. We don't have the maps for it. So he wanted to go to the East and, give LSD to different spiritual practitioners to see if they could tell him what the fuck it was. What was this psychedelic state? And of course, a natural question is there a way to induce this state without the drug? Because that would be a very cost efficient, an efficient way to live if you could reach a state of unitive consciousness without some kind of substance being necessary to reach that state. So he went all over India giving LSD that was manufactured by fucking Owsley. You know who Owsley is?
No.
So Owsley funded the Grateful Dead, and when you see those dancing bear stickers everywhere,
Yes,
Owsley's nickname was Bear. So Owsley funded the Grateful Dead by through selling LSD. I actually know somebody who rode around with Owsley when he was making some of his LSD deliveries, and he said that he would get out of the van and go up to people's houses, and they would come out and they would bow to him, like hands and knees, bow to him because they thought he was some kind of psychedelic saint. And so he manufactured a batch of very powerful LSD for Alpert, and Alpert took this to India and gave it to people, and everyone had different responses. And he talks about these, and some of them were like, I don't like it. And some people were like, give me more. This is awesome. But finally, he ended up, he was getting sick of India, and he was driving around in a Range Rover and with a friend of his. And I think they were about to go to Japan to study. He was just going to go study Buddhism in Japan. But his friend's visa was expiring, and he's like, listen, I have to go talk to my guru. And Alpert was like, whatever, man. This is all, Hinduism's this garish, symbolic bullshit, and you've been taken in by a con artist. And that was in his mind, very cynical, very skeptical. And that's fine to be that way. You should be that way. You need to have discernment in life. But so basically, he ends up... as the story goes, the night before, he ends up, and this is, by the way, I am going to answer your question about psychedelics as a tool or something not to use on the spiritual path, and this is part of answering that question.
Of course.
So, the night before, he had been standing under the stars taking a piss, and he'd been thinking about his mom who had died 6 months before. Something had happened with her spleen or something. And so they come to this, his friend goes running up to this guy sitting in a blanket and bows down to this guy sitting in a blanket and is freaking out and weeping. And Alpert's looking at this old Indian man in a blanket and is like, oh, whatever. This is absolute bullshit. And they've been driving around in Alpert's nice car. I don't know what it was, a Range Rover or some kind of nice thing. He's really hung up about it because his friend had let him borrow it, right? Mm-hmm. And so this man in a blanket looks at Alpert and looks at the car and looks at his friend who's been bowing to him, and he says, "Is that your car?" And his friend's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Give it to me. Let me have it." Now, he said the exact thing that Alpert was would have been the very most, unnerving thing for him to hear, right? Which is what gurus tend to do, is they like lock in on the very thing that you're really hung up about, and they sort of strum it like the string of a guitar or something, right? So he's freaked out about it, and he go like the man in the blanket motions for him to come over, and he's standing in front of him, and the man looks at him and is like, how much money do you make a year? That's what he asks. It's all this materialistic shit. Now, Neem Karoli Baba is who this guy is. He's a saint, basically. And he doesn't need anything. He really doesn't need anything. And I know many of his devotees now, and he didn't care about money, and he wouldn't really take money. Money was not a thing for him. He was like, spent his entire life sitting, eating, sweets and sitting under a blanket, but people were really hung up about this shit, and Alpert was especially. So, Alpert's like, very proud of himself. He's this like educated doctor, rich son of a fucking zillionaire. He's like really puffed up, Yeah. So he's saying how much money he makes a year, and everyone around them are like, they're kind of laughing and smiling. And then the guy looks at him, he says, last night you were standing under the stars, right? And Albert's like, yeah, that's not that hard to figure. Anybody could know that, right? And then he looks at him and he's like, you were thinking about your mother, weren't you? And Albert's like, what the fuck? Now that's a little out there, but still maybe somebody could figure that out. Then he mispronounces spleen because he doesn't speak English. So he tries to say spleen, but he says it in the wrong way.
What?
She did. Yeah. So Alpert's first thought before his ego was shattered by the experience of being around a being like this was, is this some CIA experiment? Because this guy's using telepathy, and I'm a trained psychologist, and I didn't tell anybody about thinking about my mom under the stars, and there's no fucking way this guy knows that my mom died of an enlarged spleen. So that was his first contact with, I suppose, like, I don't know, a very, 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 very advanced being. Yeah. And then he says there was like a pain in his chest. He felt like something inside of him had broken. His heart had opened up, and then he just started sobbing, and he felt like he had come home because he'd found his guru. Lucky son of a bitch. He'd actually come in contact with an awakened being. Now, so he started studying in this place, in this ashram, and at one point, Maharaji is what they call this person, Neem Karoli Baba, was talking with him, and he said, "You have medicine, don't you? You have medicine here. I want to try your medicine," because he knew that he had acid. He knew he had some kind of thing that he'd been giving people, and so he gives Maharaji, 1,000 micrograms of LSD created by who is still one of the most famous LSD chemists on Earth. And he eats it. An hour passes, nothing. 2 hours pass, nothing. No effect, man. No effect. Think of 1,000. Have you ever taken 1,000 micrograms of LSD?
No. I have not.
Can you fucking imagine, man? Because like these days, like I don't know how many micrograms hits of acid are these days, but I think when I was taking them, if you were lucky, maybe 100 micrograms, maybe, who knows? Mm-hmm. So that's like 10 hits of 90s acid, So that's fucking wild, right?
Yeah, there should be a chemical reaction, just by science.
The eye should dilate, something should happen. So he ends up going back to the United States. He's been converted, transformed, opened up by this being. And I think he was telling someone about this experience. His friend's like, "You are such an idiot. You fall and prey to like a basic con." He palmed the pills. He palmed the pills. He didn't take them. He palmed them. He didn't take them because just said there has to be a chemical reaction. So he returns to India. He has LSD. He has not stopped taking LSD. He returns or stopped taking psychedelics, even having like met his guru and started this kind of spiritual path. he's around Maharaji again, and again, it's the same interaction. He's like, give me your medicine, give me your medicine. And he gives it to him. This time he puts it in his mouth, chews up these, I guess they're like microdots or something, chews them up, opens his mouth so that Ram Dass his mouth is now coated with whatever the fragments of these hits of LSD are. Again, these beings, they're not like normal humans. There's some level of telepathy to them. They can tune into what a person is and what their fears are, what they're worried about. So now Alpert has given him a much larger dose than he's given him last time. And he sees that this guy's chewed this up. And Neem Karoli Baba goes underneath his blanket, right? Some time has passed. He goes underneath his blanket. Ram Dass is watching him, and he's making these groaning noises, like groaning half screams. Alpert thinks, what the fuck did I just do?
Yeah.
I just drove an old man in India crazy. That's what I just did, because God knows how much he took. He's not prepared for this. He might have a heart attack. He's like making all these moaning noises. He comes up out of the blanket. His eyes look crazy. He looks crazy. And then he just smiles and starts laughing. Because he was fucking with Alpert.
Oh, man.
He's fucking with him, because he's like, oh, your medicine is so powerful. It's driven me mad.
Yeah.
Oh, great Western medicine, Western science, Western technology. Guess what? It doesn't have power like you guys think it does. And he said to Alpert, he said, there used to be something like this in the Indus Valley, is what he said to him. And he said, this can bring you into the presence of Christ, is what he said to him, the Christ energy. But the whole point is that psychedelics are a way to go into a certain state, to understand that that the universe is a much, 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 much bigger place than what you've been taught. And that is a very valuable thing if you're somebody who's skeptical or closed down. It will open you up. The problem is you'll close back up again. So the idea is the psychedelics are the way in. Alpert, when I interviewed Ram Dass for my podcast, he said he wouldn't have gotten to Maharaji if not for the psychedelics. He wouldn't have found his guru if he wasn't on this pilgrimage through India giving acid to any sadhu who would take it, So it was a stepping stone on the path. But if we become idolatrous and we begin to think that these psychedelics are the only way, then we're no different than the person who tells us that you can't use them at all. They're just another step in the unfolding evolution of the self, or the awakening to the realization of what you really are. And so anything that is a step in the direction of awakening, as far as I'm concerned, that's a great step.
Well said, man. I totally agree. I mean, I just have yet to experience that other side. And, I'm hungry for it. I pay attention to a lot of teachers and speakers that seem to have reached some type of enlightenment, extracted some type of insight from those kind of states. But I think another aspect is just the time. Like, knowing that I want to get into meditation, I actually have been a little more mindful of where my time goes. And, unless you are really trying to, it's very easy to go through entire days and weeks where you have nothing but input. The stereo's on, you get out of the car, you walk into the house, the TV's on, and you're just taking in input all day. Usually people fall asleep with the TV on. First thing they do when they wake up might be grab their cell phone or turn the TV back on. Yeah. And I guess you really do have to separate yourself from that. And it's just like within the 9-to-5 framework of life for most people, it's like, when the fuck are you going to do it? It seems like such a monumental task to shove in there.
That's what the mind does. The mind will react to spirituality or meditation in the same way that a cat or a dog reacts to getting a bath. And
I don't want it.
Yeah, and it'll come up with all these things like, oh no, we worked too hard, too many hours of work, too much input. I know because I do this. So the idea is that we are not trying to change ourselves right now. So this does not mean that we're watching TV and we give up our job. It doesn't mean that we stop playing video games. It doesn't mean that we stop getting high. It doesn't mean that we stop anything. It means that we enter into every moment with with mindfulness. So now what we're doing is we're watching ourselves. So instead of being fully absorbed in the thing, let me give you an example. I recently got badly addicted to this video game called Hearthstone. Have you ever played that?
No. I've played a lot of games, but
God,
must be a computer game, right?
It's a computer game. Blizzard has released it.
Oh,
now,
Blizzard, okay.
Let me explain Blizzard, the World of Warcraft guys. Now let me explain to you that this is an embarrassing addiction because this is a fantasy card game like Magic the Gathering, right?
Yeah, we know that.
Hell yes.
Okay, so I was addicted to this fantasy card game called Hearthstone. Just a brutally addictive game that's so fun. But when I get addicted, man, I get fucking addicted. And that means hours and hours and hours of playing. I start feeling ill from it. Now, all that I did, because I've been playing around with these concepts, all I did was I added mindfulness to the addiction. So now when I'm playing the game, I'm still playing, but now when I'm playing the game, I'm watching myself. I'm watching the way that I act when I play. I'm watching the way my body feels. I'm watching really the way I feel emotionally as I'm playing the game. I'm watching the little flowering hits of dopamine that come from winning a game. The way that I'm clearly in a trance. I'm clearly in a hypnotic state when I'm playing the game. I'm watching the sense of numbness. I'm watching the weird anxiety attached. This kind of itching, frantic mouse pushing the lever that injects him with morphine feeling as I play. And I'm just watching. That's it. I don't try to stop the addiction. I just watch this thing and I begin to see, oh, this is like a form of hypnotic seizure. I'm creating a kind of like dopamine seizure every time I go through, and the combination of the music and the graphics and the sense of victory and buying cards and all of it have sort of created this like amazing subjective prison that my attention has been locked into. And I just watch and I watch and I watch and I let myself keep playing and I watch. And you know what starts happening, man? I stop wanting to play. It's like, I just don't think I like this anymore. And now it's gone. Now it's gone. Now, I'm not saying I'm not never going to play the game again. I haven't played it in days, but so I didn't think I'm a hater now. I don't play fantasy digital card games because I'm so fucking holy. I don't do that. No way, man. I was sitting there drinking vodka, getting stoned, playing this stupid game, and just watching, because that's the idea. We're watching this. We're watching the framework of habituation that makes up our personalities. That's all we're doing. That's all you have to add to life. Just that. Just watch yourself for once instead of being fully, stuck in the drama of your life. Just step out a little bit and watch the thing play out. It's amazing. Just that's enough. So maybe the reason that you are saying that your idea of what this practice is more like somebody who enters into a Shaolin temple and has to like get their balls kicked by monks for
yes.
weeks.
No, you're right. That's another thing I've taken away from Alan Watts is he's got constant anecdotes about people going to gurus being like, show me the thing, teach me the thing. And the guru will give him some menial task and he'll just keep doing it until the guy is so tired that he finally gets it. And the whole idea is that you've had it all along. You've just forgotten it. You've chosen to forget your true self.
There you go.
Yeah. Whether it's whether that's a natural part of life or orchestrated by a dark machine, who knows? But apparently the solution is just to remember what you've forgotten.
Yeah, I mean that's a beautiful way to put it. That's there's the story. I don't know if you know that monkey god Hanuman. You know that god Hanuman?
Kyle probably does.
There's a Hindu monkey god called Hanuman, and there's a lot of great stories about this god. This god it was a servant to Ram, the creator. Ram is the name of God in Hinduism. Yeah. And this monkey has done all kinds of things for Ram. Like, this is mythology. Mythology is, of course, a container that contains within it an energy, to get across ideas. So Hanuman has done all these fantastic things for Ram. And Ram says to Hanuman, no one has ever done these things like for me before. Monkey, what are you? What are you, monkey? That's what Ram says to. And Hanuman says to Ram, when I forget who I am, I serve you. When I remember who I am, I become you. And that, I think, is a beautiful way. Yeah, isn't that cool?
Yeah.
So it's like as long as we've forgotten who we are, and as long as we've had the courage to at least admit that we clearly are the universe with some kind of amnesia,
right?
Then isn't the logical step to, as much as we can, serve the other parts of the universe that have amnesia as much as we can, with loving kindness and compassion? So that instead of seeing this person as an enemy and this person as a friend, that all these are just tendrils of the universe that have forgotten who they really are, just like us. And so the logical thing is, let's just help as much as we can the people who are around us. I'm not saying go down to a fucking soup kitchen and dish out soup to the homeless. You could do that. Definitely do that if you feel compelled to. But guaranteed, there's somebody around you right now, someone near to you, someone who needs your help in your circle of friends that you've been putting off helping. Just fucking help them. Do that as your practice. Don't burn incense candles and stare at your guru. You don't have to do any of that shit. That might happen eventually. But really, if you want the quickest way, the fastest way to experience this thing that it sounds like you want to experience, then the best way to do that is just get into the mindset of helping the people around you. And in the process of doing that, you will notice a kind of dissolution of your ego starts naturally happening anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's well said and good advice, because that's kind of, and maybe it's my own ego saying like, oh, you don't need that shit. Don't worry about that shit. But I always say to myself, like, what is the purpose of the self-discovery without action? Because a lot of the high-end gurus, there's a lot of talk. There's a lot of, sitting around and trying to inspire. But, it's like, where's the real action?
Well, sitting around and trying to inspire could be considered an action if you really are.
That's true.
But this is Neem Kirli Baba gave 3 instructions to Ram Dass when he came back to the United States, and that was love everyone, serve everyone, and remember God. Those are the 3 instructions. Simple as that. So as simple as loving everyone. Good luck. Good luck. But that's it. It's a real simple thing. We want some now that's maybe a problem as you high-end gurus, as you put it, or some people, they try to make everything really complicated, because it's easier to sell complicated than it is to sell simple. You know what I mean? If you have some complicated fucking system,
right,
then you sure as fuck can make a lot of money off of that if you make it a secret thing or a pay thing, right? But how the fuck are you going to help everyone around you as much as you can? How do you that won't fill a book? You
Yeah.
know, that won't even be a blog. That's like a tweet. It's a tweet.
Half a tweet.
Yeah, it's
Jesus.
half a fucking tweet. But with it contained just within that is a fractal, which has within it every scripture, every devotional poem, everything right there. That's it.
Right.
And that's it. And people don't want that. I
Yeah.
certainly don't want that. You don't want to fucking just realize that the great sacred holy moment is not necessarily going to come when you ascend some peak and a UFO comes down and gives you some transmission. It's going to come when you bring your sick neighbor a bowl of soup because you know she's not feeling well and she can't go to get soup, even though your neighbor is a fucking bitch who constantly yells at you for leaving your clothes out in the laundry room, right? That's the divine moment. And if you want to extrapolate from that, societal reform or transformation of society, imagine if everybody adopted that concept. And then from that, instead of having an imposed system, you have a kind of emergence of an underlying transcendent form rising up through human action. And that thing, wow, what would that look like, man? What would that look like? Nobody knows because it's never happened.
Right. Well, there are a lot of people in the conspiracy world who, when I talk to them, they say, all this stuff that we're talking about, all these little details of how we're being fucked, it really is all illusionary. These power structures are really only there because, Michael Tessarion, one of my favorite guests, he said, everybody's worried about being sold a lie. But what you should really worry about is, have I bought a lie? You've made the conscious choice to buy into all these things that you seem to be so frustrated with. And, if everybody just collectively said, nah, it's not important, we could transcend all these serious stresses in our life, they would just kind of melt right away.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know if they would melt right away, but I know that you would immediately, the moment you got into a mind state where you're just going to try to help people around you, as simple and obvious as that sounds, it seems like you would begin to undermine one very important idea that for the war machine to work, the military-industrial complex, there's a big idea that everyone needs to have, which is that there is them and there is us. That's really important, man. You got to have an us and situation for war to even exist. It's really important. And you need an us and them situation that represents the people who believe the right things and the people who believe the wrong things. Mm-hmm. So the moment you start getting rid of that us and them as much as you can, you're not going to get rid of it all, and maybe ever. You do start undermining. You start undermining one of the pillars of the war machine, mm-hmm. in a way that, like, directly fighting it maybe it isn't necessarily going to work. You just become the thing that you're fighting, And I'm not saying don't take action. There are times when their action needs to happen. The Bhagavad Gita takes place on a battlefield, but that battlefield represents more the internal struggle. Do that first. Find out where the pyramid with the eye floating above it is inside of you first, and allow that thing to transform the internal conspiracy, cops in the head. Let that change, and then see how the external world changes with it.
Well said. I mean, it's pretty much like the phrase that I've heard you say before that resonated with me was kill the vampire in your life. And it seems like now you've kind of evolved that into love the vampire, which that's the struggle. That's the part I'm struggling with.
Me too, friend. And
right.
and it's not going to happen all at once. And that's a really important thing to realize. You just have to recognize that this is not it's not a pill that you take and everything's better all of a sudden. And it's not like you're going to always feel like opening yourself up to the people around you. You won't. You're going to be as much of a of a shithead is a lot of the way you feel might just be some biochemical imbalance that because you didn't get enough sleep. So you're not gonna like it's not like we're talking about this fast instant thing. It's just you just recognize that this is a process, and it's a process that's based on loving yourself. Just love yourself. I mean, Christ, it sounds so simple, but when you think about it, you might realize that you've really been rejecting parts of yourself in the most extreme way. You don't have to do that.
Yeah, it's really easy to dismiss. You say, "Yeah, I hear you. Love yourself, but what else?" It's like it's very easy to try to look around that and find something else instead of confronting that, which really is challenging. And so people are like, look for something easier. But to pull this thing together, how would you package some of this material for someone out in the audience who is stuck in a 9-to-5 reality? They are dying to get out of it. They want to break free with some type of creative expression or live the artistic path, and they're having financial problems. They can't pay the bills. Everything's pulling at them. What kind of advice would you give to someone in that situation? How do you love yourself? How do you deal with the vampire in your life and also still get into something better?
There's just a story that I just heard about Neem Karoli Baba that I thought was so cool. He was out in a boat on the Ganges River with one of his disciples, and they're floating out in the river, and he says to this guy, "Jump out of the boat," and the guy's like, "I can't swim. I'll drown." And he says, "No, jump out of the boat." And he's like, I can't do that because I can't swim. And Maharaji, Neem Karoli Baba, points to this bridge, that's really a high bridge. And he said, you could jump off of that bridge, and if it wasn't your time to die, you wouldn't die. And so finally this disciple jumps out of the boat into the Ganges River. And the water's only waist high. So it's like, so often, there's this action that we know we have to take, and it's terrifying. And that's what they call the leap of faith. It's terrifying because you have to dive off of this cliff eventually and know what's underneath, because there's just clouds. It's a long fall. You don't know what's down there. It could be rocks and rubble, and you could land twisted and broken among the corpses of all the other insane people who jumped off that cliff thinking that there was something safe down there. And there could be, at the bottom of that cliff, an ocean of warm water filled with blowjob mermaids.
Right, yeah.
It could be down there too. But no, because if you knew, there wouldn't be any kind of initiation. There wouldn't be there wouldn't be anything in it that meant anything. It would just be you diving into a hot tub if you knew there was hot water down there. So there are many times where you will find yourself feeling this kind of butterfly sensation in your stomach when you think about the action that you know you need to take. And if you could take that action with a sense of mindfulness and surrender and trust and just dive in, then even if disaster is at the end of the bump, at least you've experienced true autonomy and freedom in that one moment. I'm not advising irresponsibility. If you're stuck in a job, if you have a family to feed, if you have children and you need to feed people, it's not you can't just give up a job and leave. And I understand that. But there might be something smaller. There might be a little step that you could take in the direction of this great leap that you haven't taken yet, and you're pretending that you're too busy to do it. Maybe night classes or morning classes, or maybe something that you could do on the weekend. Or, if you read The Count of Monte Cristo, he's, I love these prison escape movies where they don't do it all at once. It's tiny,
Yeah.
tiny little movements in the direction of freedom.
Perfectly said. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great analogy.
So these tiny movements, they might not even start with an external action. They just might start with beginning to develop a state of mindfulness. Watch the way you're acting at your job. Watch the way that you work. Watch just the way you are. See the way you interact with the people around you. Feel the different internal states that happen, the anxiety that comes and goes, the tiredness that comes in the afternoon, or the feeling of dread and suffering as you go to work. Watch this. Just open up yourself to watch the way that you feel and the way that you behave in this situation. And somehow just that mindfulness and attention might begin to create the necessary changes to the rudder of yourself that begin to cause you to move in a different direction for a time that we're all being sucked inexorably in the direction of the void. So that could just be that could just be something that you could do. But one thing's for certain, there's always something you can do. You're never truly trapped. And if you think you're trapped, then the trap is one that you have laid for yourself and one that you have allowed yourself to get entangled with. You're the hunter and the prey. So maybe the idea is to surrender. And surrender means giving up this war against yourself. You don't have to be in a constant eternal struggle with yourself anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just like what you're talking about. Terrence McKenna, a quote I used to love, he says, "Magic is done by hurling yourself into the abyss and realizing it's a feather bed."
There you go. Yes. Exactly. And sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not.
Sometimes it's a fucking it's rocks and you hurt yourself. And you fucking hurt yourself. So it's like that's an important thing to realize. The abyss sometimes is not always a feather bed. And that's why Chogyam Trungpa says that this feeling of disappointment is a really great place to begin the spiritual path. Because a feeling of disappointment is in contact with things as they are, versus the way you wish things were. Things as they are, get into that. The way things are right now. Surrender to that.
Amen, man. And people shouldn't let that fear that it might not be a feather bed, don't let that paralyze you. I mean, like you were saying, I love that prison analogy. You can dig that tunnel 1 inch at a time, and eventually you can climb out of that prison. I thought that was a great analogy. But, man, that's about our time. I really appreciate you being here. I mean, Kyle, was there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I just want to say, Duncan, I'm a huge fan. I've been a fan for such a long time. And, you rarely get feedback like this, but let me just say to you, man, that when you were putting out these episodes with your mother, when she was actively going through the dying process, and you were facing it, and you were being honest about it, and you were sharing it, that happened to coincide with the period in my life when my wife and I had quit our jobs, lost our home, fucked up our whole marriage and our so-called financial security. We moved in with her parents, and her dad was dying of a terminal brain illness at the same exact time. I mean, same time. And we re-listened to those episodes over and over, and it's just so... There's nothing in comparison to how raw, emotionally, and therapeutic that was for us both. And I would just say thank you very much, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So helpful.
Thank you. I'm glad that my mom could be of service to you, because that's definitely what she was into, and I that's something that when somebody dies, it takes a long time to really process it. But one thing that I keep thinking is, like, my mom had a spiritual practice, and she, if anything, really speaks for what can come from working It's how gracefully it will allow you to die. And she died in a very graceful way, in a very selfless way, and I think that speaks more for what can come from really beginning this journey into the self. Is that you can actually leave this dimension with grace, and in a way that leaves the people who are still here not feeling such a crushing sense of bitterness or anger towards the natural way things are, but a kind of spellbound sense of love, and a feeling that the world is, for even though a light has gone out of it that I'll never have again, still feeling that the world is as much a beautiful place as it was when they were there. That's how you want to leave.
Damn.
They say, I just heard somebody say there's 2 good times to plant a tree. 20 years ago or right now. And
yeah, that's well said, man.
And I feel that applies to like a spiritual practice. There's 2 great times to start this path, and you could start it when you were 11-year-old, an 8-year-old in Tibet because you were picked as some reincarnated lama, or you could start right now, at this moment. Just be in this moment now, and I think that's something that my mom probably wanted. That's an idea that my mom wanted to get out into the world. So thanks for listening to that.
Wow, well said, man. It's really been a fucking treat, and I hope we've extracted a little inspiration for the people to get their new year started. For those who don't know you and want to flex their Duncan Trussell muscle, where can they get more of you, man?
Yeah, you can go to DuncanTrussell.com, and that you can follow me on Twitter. It's at Duncan Trussell, but my tweets aren't that great. But you can follow me. Follow me if you want.
Oh, man. All right. Well, I usually end each show with a song that ties everything together, but I'd like to pass that baton to you today, man. I mean, what song do you think would best cap off this conversation?
Daniel Johnston's True Love Will Find You in the End.
Mm-hmm. There it is. Thanks again, man. Best of luck to you in the new year.
Hare Krishna. Nice chatting with you guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Duncan.
Thanks,
Bye.
Man.
See ya.
All right, man. Wow. What'd you think? I mean, that was a pretty great episode. Did you take anything away from that maybe you is a little clearer than it was before?
Yeah, I really liked when Duncan was talking about, perhaps not the best way to fight the war machine is to go out there and do anti-war protests, and you're fighting the powers that are with power, like you're trying to combat the combat. And so in this, a